It is my pleasure today to welcome our guest, Mamaili Mamaila. I hope I pronounced that correctly, but please correct me when you start if that's not correct. We invited Mamaili, in fact, to participate in the 3-day Learner Analytics Bootcamp, which is being hosted by UCT, the Data Analytics for Student Success project, and the South African Association for Institutional Research, SAR, where she's presenting in person tomorrow on a similar topic, and the overall theme there is storytelling with data. And I invited her because, well, to go back a long way, I've kind of followed the work of Alistair Otter and Media Hack and the Outlier, and Alistair is a kind of a hacker journalist, is probably the best way I can put it, who's been working and writing in the technology space, but also more broadly, and came to more prominence in COVID with a series of online dashboards and visualizations, and really became a sort of media innovation force, in a sense, in the South African landscape, doing work that I think rivals work that's being done internationally by the New York Times and other leading publishers exploring data journalism, essentially the ability to present compelling information online. And so I noticed Mamaili from Twitter, who joined it, and in fact, and I thought at the time, oh, that's really cool. It's like sports journalism crossed with data journalism, and in this kind of new media collective, that sounds really intriguing. And last year she won an award for innovation in journalism, and so I thought who better to invite to speak to us from a slightly external perspective about storytelling and data, and bringing in some ideas and concepts into the work that we do in learning analytics and in higher education and universities. So Mamaili, it's my pleasure to welcome you here today, and I will hand over to you with no further ado. Thanks very much for joining us. And I'll just put my camera on to say hi because we're all online.
Sure, I'll put my camera on too. I hope I'm audible to everybody, but thank you so much for that introduction. As mentioned, my name is Mamaili Mamaila. It's a very intriguing name to a lot of people, but yeah, I guess my parents had run out of ideas. And yeah, as mentioned, I work for Media Hack Collective, which is a company that specializes in data insights, data analytics, and visualization. And we gained prominence, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we produced a COVID-19 dashboard that could visualize at the time key COVID-19 statistics. And from that, we then realized that as much as we love producing data projects for other people, we would like to produce our own projects and publish them. And that's when we created the platform called the Outlier, which is found at the outlier.coza. And I'll share a bit about that during my presentation. And that's where we explore our own data journalism projects, because we are a newsroom with a background of journalism. So yeah, that is a bit about the Outlier, and I will share my presentation shortly. And I just left room for questions towards the end. So if you do have a question that pops up during the presentation, you can either put it in the chat, or you can wait towards the end when I open up the floor for questions. So without wasting any time, I'll begin my presentation on telling compelling stories with data visualizations. So as I mentioned, we are a data journalism publication at the Outlier, and visualizations are a very big part of what we do, because they really add and complement our stories very well. So I'm happy to be sharing a little bit of insights from what we've learned on our journey since we've started around August 2021. So just to define data visualization, it's basically visual communication. There's a lot of information out there, especially when it comes to data, and data storytellers can articulate an idea very quickly and succinctly with data visualization. And as much as it's important to have something that looks good, visualizations actually, data visualizations in particular, they actually play a bigger purpose than just looking beautiful. If you are able to produce a good visual, it can be a visual worth 1,000 words. And you probably ask yourselves why it's important to visualize your data, and there are multiple reasons for that. Whilst you are analyzing your data, you are able to spot specific patterns and trends and correlations, and visualizing these can help you to analyze your data and explore information further, as well as discover new story angles that you may have not thought of before while investigating the spreadsheet the particular spreadsheet that you're working with. And in our research, because we do continuous research on what our audiences like and what they don't like, we came to the conclusion that people do not have time to read long form journalism that doesn't capture them from the first few paragraphs. But more than that, because we are able to visualize the data that we work with and turn it into stories, we figured that if we are able to use very compelling visuals that highlight key parts of the stories that we write about, then we will be able to communicate more effectively with people, and it might actually make them gain interest in reading what we put together for them. So as I mentioned, visuals can actually aid your data analysis. Visualizations are a very important part of understanding your data and conceptualizing the story. And they are a tool that you can use to quickly identify what patterns are in your spreadsheet. Because at times you may have a particular vision for what you'd like to visualize, but then the end product may end up disappointing you if it doesn't look as you envisioned it. If you were looking at comparing trends and there's nothing to compare because the trends all look the same or similar, you might be disappointed after doing so much work in your analysis. So my advice would be, while you're analyzing your data, try to take a break in between and visualize what you're working with, so that you ensure that your end product, in terms of the visuals and the actual story, can actually complement each other. So the shape of your data is very, very important. Once you've analyzed your data and your story and your ideas are starting to take shape, you would need to think about what kind of charts and visuals you'd like to do. And there are a couple of things to consider. A lot of the times when we pitch stories, the first question that comes up is, what exactly is it that you want to show? And I think it's very important to hone in on a specific area and avoid focusing on too many things, so that you're able to show a point and that the point is able to resonate with your audience. You also need to think about what is the best way to show your data. Should I use a map? Should I use a table? Or should I use a simple bar chart? What chart or charts will have the most impact? There actually is no point to creating this comprehensive map that has really nice colors, but people can't even see what you're trying to show because some of the labels can't show. For example, if you're working with a world map, there was a time when I wanted to visualize something that involved over 100 countries, and it ended up not working out well on a map, and the simple reason for that is The simple reason for that is that, you know, some countries are just too small to see. Nobody knows where everything is. And I eventually had to go with a table, because what I was trying to do is get the message across about the information that I was analyzing. So it's very important to understand which chart will have the most impact. Will it benefit the story that you're working on? Visuals are not, you know, separate from your analysis. They are very much complementary tools for your data storytelling, and it's very important that they are beneficial to your story. But if you want to, you can have a chart by itself as a standalone graphic for social media purposes or any other format that you want to present it. For example, in a newsletter, which is something that we do quite a lot. But remember that there has to be a point to your visuals. As I mentioned, it's not enough for it to just look pretty. What are you trying to show us? What are you trying to tell us with this? And is it easy for your audience to pick up, you know, your message? And now we move on to making your charts. A couple of pointers to remember when you make your charts. Please don't put too much into your chart so that the message gets lost. As much as you understand the topic at hand very well, because you've been analyzing data over a long period of time, it's important to simplify things so that your reader is able to understand exactly what you're trying to say. You can make your point repeatedly if you want your readers to understand. You know, you need to have space for a headline, and if you want to give more context, you can add a subheading, you know, and that will explain exactly what is going on in your visual. Annotate it with labels if you want to, but avoid cluttering your charts. If the labels do not add value to your chart, please just remove it, because you don't want people focusing on anything other than what you are trying, the message that you're trying to convey. And what works for me usually, if I'm unsure, is giving a chart to a colleague or friend to ask them if they understand it. If people around you can't understand the message that you're conveying, it's quite likely that your audience won't either. And try to limit, you know, your colors. There needs to be a reason why you differentiate colors, whether you're comparing two categories or you're using the same color in different shades because you want to show, you know, the largest to the smallest in a particular data set that you're working with. So don't just rush to use a lot more colors. Remember, the main point is that you're trying to get a message across and you don't want anything to distract from that. Using more than one color has the possibility of doing just that. And there are two types of charts that you can create. These are static charts or interactive charts, and they each have different benefits. The benefits of static charts is that they tend to focus on the point that you're making. And you know, you're not able to rely on interactivity to add value for readers. They also give readers less homework, because people don't actually have to go and find the information that they're looking for. It's static, everything that you need is there, and it's not going to change. They're also ideal for sharing on social media platforms without needing any additional work. My advice would be that you use square charts because they're better suited for sharing on social media networks. And the benefits of interactive charts, they work well when readers are engaged or have personal connection with the data, which is something that we do. We have tools and data for different topics, for example, a crime tracker so that people can track crime statistics in their area, a municipality tracker so that people can track which political parties are governing their municipalities, and so forth. I would say do not make an interactive chart unless it adds value, unless you have a very comprehensive data set where you can compare a lot of things like location, you know, crime statistics, for example. There's actually no need to create an interactive chart. It takes a great amount of work to create one. So when you do, it must be worth it. And it must really add value to the particular subject that you're investigating at that time. Modern tools do an excellent job of creating interactive visuals, but it is easy to overdo it. And instead of focusing on the primary message, you end up putting in clutter and detail. And as I mentioned, less clutter is, very, very key. And we move on to choosing colors for your charts. You know, I would say start with as few colors as possible when you start out, and think about what the colors on your chart represent. Use color to highlight, for example, a key observation. It may be useful to draw your chart in mostly gray tones and then highlight key data in a color like red, for example, if you're trying to draw attention on a specific thing. If you're comparing, certain statistics by year, for example, and if there's a year that stands out, or if there's a year that you want to focus on for a particular reason, then you can use a different color to the other bars, because then it makes sense why you are, placing a focus on that specific year. And make sure that the colors are distinct enough from each other so that everyone will see the difference if you are using different colors. Use colors consistently, and where possible, a single colors for all labels and colors, like an easy to read black. And be purposeful with your colors. If you do use multiple colors, make sure they represent some useful insight. A great tool for colors is Cynthia Brewer's Color Brewer sets, and I've just put the URL there for you so that you can go onto it and see and navigate your way around it and see how it can help you with choosing colors. Very important is that not everybody sees color the same, so you need to consider color blindness. A lot of applications that we use to create charts and to download chart templates do have a colorblind safe option. I would advise you to always use it so that your end product can resonate with everybody and be very inclusive. So we go into the different kinds of charts and what their specific purposes are. And the first one is, the basic line and bar charts, which are your most basic type of charts. And they contain an x-axis which shows the information you're comparing, and a y-axis which shows the measurement of the information you're comparing. Line charts are good for continuous information over time. If you're trying to show different amounts over a couple of years, that is the best template to use. So an example would be the cost of fuel over years, or inflation, or fluctuations in the stock market. We use bar charts for categorical information, for instance, the price of fuel in different countries, or temperature changes, or school results, or the number of votes for each political candidate. Sometimes simplicity is, the best way to make an impact. A lot of people think line and bar charts are very boring, but if they get your point across, I would advise that, stick to that. It's no use using a map, for example, and it doesn't necessarily communicate your message. And the tools that I use to create line and bar charts are Flourish and Data Wrapper. They also have other chart templates like tables and maps and scatter plots. Both applications are free and allow you to upload your data set and begin visualizing immediately. So an example of a bar chart is on the right, which is the Outlier's grocery basket. This is a project that we started last year in June. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, and we basically compared the price of basic goods at 4 retailers at the time, which has now grown to 8. And it made such a huge impact. And we thought, let's try to do this on a monthly basis and see if it'll still have the same impact. And like I said, a lot of people think that a bar chart is very, very boring and simplistic, but the grocery basket is one of our biggest hits. I think since the COVID-19 dashboard that we did before the launch of the Outlier, this is proving to be something that people find very valuable. And then on my left, this is the price watch for the grocery basket that we've been doing. We measured it from August 2022 to April 2023. And this just measures, the price fluctuations for the grocery baskets across the retailers that we collect data from. And you can see, how the prices go high and low over time. And that is why you would use a line chart, to actually show stuff and trends over time. There are other charts that you can use to visualize your data. There are quite a lot, but I gave a few options. And pie charts can be useful for showing parts of a whole. For instance, you would use a pie chart to show the breakdown of the genders of a population of a specific town, country, or region. But beware of pie charts with too many slices, which can become too hard to understand. And if they have too many slices and some of them are, smaller than others, it can also be a bit difficult to label, and people might not know what they're looking at a specific time. It's very important that pie charts show parts of a whole, and the slices must always add up to 100%, just like a pie. And then we've got scatter plots, which are useful to understand how sets of data relate to one another. For example, school pupil exam results versus the school district that they're in. These charts are useful because they can also include a third dimension. Points could be plotted on X and Y axes, and the size of the point could be a third additional dimension. They are usually used to show the relationship between two numerical variables. There are also additional chart types, many of which combine the basic chart types. Area charts, for example, are like line charts, but they better illustrate the idea of volume. And stacked bar charts are a good way of showing how the constituent parts of something change over time. This is an example of an area chart and a dot plot, which is another type of a chart. In the chart on top, which is one that I did, I looked at, the players that had the most game time in South Africa's top flight football league, which is the DStv Premiership. A lot of people refer to it as the PSL as well. And, it shows sort of the teams and the number of minutes that they have, and then I highlighted key players that I've that had the most game time. So you can see in one instance, a Mamelodi Sundowns player, Peter Chalulile, played 4,000 minutes, which is a lot, on PSL standards, because a lot of players don't play above 2,000 minutes in a season, for example. And the one beneath it is a area chart which shows the 5 municipalities that owe Eskom, the most amount of money. Eskom is a very touchy subject for a lot of us right now because of the challenges that we're facing. But yeah, it is important for us to tell different stories with different angles, and this is one that we did around energy. And then another way to visualize your charts are using map, which are a very popular tool. And you can use it to show data like election results, or it can be used for a broad variety of data, such as people who are affected by health crisis, wars, civil strife, and natural disasters. There are 2 popular maps to visualize data: choropleth map and a bubble map. The choropleth map is when you shade regions, districts, and municipalities in different colors. And a bubble map is when you use a shape on a set of coordinates to visualize data like population, density, or the location of capitals, factories, and events. Data Wrapper and Flourish, also have map templates, and they're actually a really great tool for mapping. And the difference is when using these tools for maps is that the data needs to have location data, including the latitude and longitude. If the apps at times, if you're trying to create a complex map, it might not have, the template might not, accommodate the data that you have. But you are able to make, your map from scratch, even if you don't know how to code. You just need to find shape files or JSON files of the area you want to map, and you can see what they look like in mapshaper.org and adjust the size and convert the shape files to JSON files if you need to. And then you can use Flourish's blank maps, the Flourish's blank maps option to map your custom map. Some examples of maps that we did. Last year, we mapped the election results for the Kenyan election between William Ruto and Raila Odinga. And we also mapped, this is a project that I worked on, as Stefan mentioned, I do a lot with sports data, and leading up to the World Cup last year, I sort of analyzed what Africa's chances were at the FIFA World Cup, but I came across a data set of the countries that actually qualified, the African countries specifically that have qualified for the FIFA World Cup previously, and it highlighted to me that most of Africa, you know, has never qualified for the World Cup, and that raises a lot of questions, you know, when you look at it that way, and it, you know, I mean, you could ask questions about the standard of, you know, football being played in Africa, or if, you know, European countries are favored, or whatever it is that you want to look into. So yeah, these are just examples of simple maps that we've done. Like I said, just try not to be very complex with your map, because people still need to be able to make out what information you have mapped. And if you're looking for some data visualization inspiration, we have static charts that we post on our website, the outlier.coza, a section called Our World in Charts, where we look at different topics. We are a small newsroom of 5 based in Johannesburg, and we have 2 other contributors, one based in Cape Town and one based in the US. And we all do have different, you know, passions and interests. So we cover, you know, a number of topics, and we post a new chart every single day, at least one chart a day. Sometimes it's more, and we look at different topics like sports, crime, politics, lifestyle, and the environment. So if you're looking for inspiration to see how you can create static visualizations, you can go to the Outlier Charts Gallery. And if you're looking for inspiration on interactive charts, you can go to the Outlier website, and our tools and data is available just as you open the website. For example, we've got a load shedding tracker, which tracks how many days we've had load shedding in the last few months. And we track it over time, and you know, that's the value for us in the interactivity, because we can update it daily, because load shedding is a daily thing now. But we have other trackers, you know, our crime tracker, our COVID-19 tracker, we stopped updating last year in June. Our municipality tracker, we update every time there's a change in which political party is ruling a specific city, a specific municipality rather. And we've got our crime tracker as well, which tracks crime statistics, and you can actually look at how much crime there is in different areas. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, yeah, you are more than welcome to ask.
Stephen here. I'm going to jump in with the first question. Tell us a bit about how your design has evolved. And you mentioned a bit about doing research, and how does that feed into your work?
So we standardized our charts sometime last year. I think it was around April, and we use a standard format for every single chart that we do. And that is mainly because it was very difficult at times to decide, for instance, on colors and where to put labels and how big a specific chart must be. And we moved away from interactive charts because we felt that through interactive charts, a lot of the times we weren't really able to get our point across, number one, and we weren't able to share our visuals on social media. Like with the COVID-19 dashboard, you actually have to go in physically and see what statistics, whatever statistics that you were looking for. So the reason we moved to static charts is because we can share them on social media and they gain traction. And it's just a matter of answering key questions, we are journalists, so we use something called the inverted pyramid method, which answers, questions like what, why, when, how, and why, and if those questions are answered and you have them in your chart, it's a very good place to start. You can add extra information, but obviously, as I mentioned, not to distract from your specific focus or whatever message it is that you're trying to tell. And I see there's a question in the chat as well. What are some of the tools that I use to develop data visualizations? So there are a number of tools that I use. The basic visual that I'll create would be done in Data Wrapper or Flourish, and you can then export that as an SVG or a PNG, and then I annotate it further in Figma. But you can use other tools to annotate it. It doesn't strictly need to be Figma. I mean, you can use Adobe, for example, depending on what the organization that you work for prefers to use, or what you prefer to use and what you're comfortable with. So yeah, that's what I use to visualize my data sets.
Wiseman, I'm sure you can unmute and ask a question. I see you got your hand up.
Thanks, Chair, to allow me to ask the question. Well, I joined a bit late. I'm not even sure if you're Chair. Mamaila, thanks for this informative session. I'm actually on the road, but I thought to myself, I can't lose this. So I heard you talking about visualizing the COVID-19 data and also the Achilles heel for all South Africans currently, the load shedding data. What are the sources? Because I've heard when I was listening to the radio, one of the gentlemen talking about the sources of COVID data, specifically saying that it's very hard to get a centralized data in SA. I'd like to hear from you, what are your sources and how do you get that information? Is it manual processes, or you've got some APIs and things like those linked to your systems to pull the data through and updates, etc.? Thank you.
Well, it's very difficult because we do live, on the African continent, and our COVID-19 dashboard was very comprehensive. We used to cover a lot more countries, so we at times use multiple sources for the same data set because you have to be very thorough. A lot of organizations we find do not want to share data, so we then manually research, the data that we use. Even though we do get data provided from organizations, obviously we can't just trust that what they're giving us is correct. So research is important. Even speaking to experts in that specific subject matter. So if you are just making an example, researching data on the environment, it's very key to speak to people who work in that field to get an understanding of, if what you're being shown reflects the actual true picture, of what's happening in that particular industry. So with the COVID-19 data, we used a lot of the stuff from the Department of Health and the World Health Organization, and we had to compare to see if what they're saying is the same thing, and we didn't really find much problems with that, except for the fact that we obviously had to clean and scrape the data sets so that they are usable, because we do use Flourish, and Flourish will not visualize your data for you if it's not clean. And you also asked about the COVID-19 dashboard. What else? What was the other one?
I think electricity data.
Oh, electricity data we get from Eskom and Eskom's push. And yeah, we do check it out, find, whether or not it's reliable. And yeah, it's quite a lot of work, especially with these interactive ones, because we try to be as thorough as possible. but it's not very easy. But there are a lot of processes that we follow to try and get the data and ensure that it's accurate and truthful data that we're working with.
I have another question. Tell us about your journey to becoming a data journalist and how you've learned what you know now, how you built up kind of the craft and the expertise and the skills.
Yeah, I started working as a journalist in 2019, and I worked for a engineering and mining publication, Engineering News and Mining Weekly, and it's print and online, but I just did basic traditional journalism, writing up features and reports and, the like cover stories and editorials. And eventually I felt I just felt like I understood and knew that environment very well, and I needed to grow. And I got the opportunity to study towards my BA Honours in Journalism at WITS. And I then stumbled upon data journalism. I must admit, before that, I had not heard of data journalism before. And I just thought, let me try to delve into something new. The reason why I decided to leave my old job anyway was because I felt that I needed to grow. So it seemed like an avenue for growth for me. So that's where I studied data journalism. And when I was done with that course, I, reached out to Media Hack because they're the only newsroom that does data journalism on a daily basis. So I reached out to them and I asked if I can intern with them for 6 months and learn how to apply, what I learned at WITS in their newsroom. And luckily they agreed. And when I got to Media Hack, they had already found their rhythm. The people that were working there had already found their rhythm, and they were able to do data reporting on so many topics, but one topic that they had not explored was sports. And I'm a huge sports fan, and I read sports data stories ever since I studied data journalism from the UK and from America, for example. And I couldn't read anything about sports data stories in South Africa because nobody does it, at the moment, at that time at least. So that's the specific area that I felt, okay, let me focus on this because everybody else is, able to report on health and economics with data. Maybe I should make this my specific project for the next 6 months and let's see how it goes. And the people in my newsroom don't really like sports, so it was very difficult starting out at first, but I found my rhythm, and that's how I got into data journalism. So I spent 6 months there last year as an intern, and then afterwards I joined them on a permanent basis. And that's been my journey. I really do just focus on sports, African sports. I've got my own Outlier sports newsletter. And it's written from the perspective of somebody who's trying to educate people about the happenings in sports in South Africa and Africa. So if you'd like, you can subscribe for that. I'll give you the link, later towards the end of this presentation. And I think it's a lot of valuable insight. Somebody as young as 5 can understand the things that I write about because they're not very complex. I break it down very well. So that was my journey in getting into data journalism.
Thanks for that. I'm sure there must be some questions before I monopolize the question time.
I've got a question. Do you have any interest in statistics about that you can share with us about South African football?
Yes. Wow. I've done a lot of work in that department. Wow. I will share the link to my newsletter, which you can check out because that covers a lot of that. My main focus is South African football in the sports reporting that I do. And there are quite a number of stories that I did on South African football using stats and data. I'll share that as well with you if you'd like.
And a question from Polite in the chat about how do you evaluate the quality of your data?
If it can be verifiable, the last thing you want to do is produce this, comprehensive story and analysis with visualizations, and then people are quick to point out that, no, actually this is false, or whatever the case may be. There is room to make mistakes, but you don't want to make mistakes repeatedly to the point where people don't trust the data that you put out. So I rely a lot on research. It takes it takes a long time to produce the stories that we produce. We are not a mainstream news organization, and our goal was never to break news. We don't do breaking news like any other publication would do. So I mean, that's sort of what differentiates us from the rest, and we don't put ourselves under pressure to get information out as quickly as possible. So research and speaking to experts, that helps a lot, especially for me, for example. I don't cover sports from an on-field point of view. Everybody else in South Africa does that. They tell you match reports and what happened on the field of play and so forth. I look at the issues that affect, the progress of sports, like the business side of it, for example, and, looking at ages of players and, locations and things like that. So, yeah, I have to rely on people to tell me or give me an indication of whether I'm on the right path or not. And sometimes it's not just about reaching out to one person, but a couple, because you don't want to be misled by somebody who has a specific agenda, So that's we use a number of tools a number of ways rather, and strategies to evaluate the quality of our data.
So another question, what's the relationship between starting with the data and starting with the story? Do you have cases where a story was turned on its head by the data, or you didn't think there was a story there and then something left out and then you wrote a story about something you saw in the data?
Yeah, so my very first data project that I did looked at the number of spectators that South African football clubs are able to pull in. So it was a very interesting topic because football is known as South Africa's most popular sport, but when you look at a lot of the matches, majority of the matches, they don't have enough spectators coming into stadiums. And I thought at the time, this would be a simple visual. I wanted to do a bar chart with every stadium and every team and their attendance. And upon, visualizing the data and realizing that actually we don't have that many people at stadiums, that's how I was able to build the story. And, I explored, for example, why other jurisdictions in Africa like Egypt, and Tanzania and Algeria are able to pull in so much fans and South Africa is not. We have the infrastructure. It was a very surprising revelation to make at the time, because how does the sport have so much popularity, but it's not able to translate into people actually coming in and paying to watch it live? And obviously comparing with Europe and China, I don't really like comparing with Europe and China that much with sport, because the disparities are just too grand. But for that specific story I did, and I spoke to a sports journalist at the time who he has worked in South Africa, and he's back home in England now, working and reporting on sports that side, on what the differences are, and was able to sort of highlight what his observations were. And I spoke to a sports business researcher who was able to, sort of highlight what challenges South Africans have, in getting to stadiums or supporting teams, and what challenges clubs have, and why they aren't able to pull in a crowd. And yeah, it was a very, it was something that started out as a simple visual. And the more I asked questions about the data, the more I realized that there are questions that need to be answered. And that's how it sort of evolved. So at times you find a data set and you think, wow, this is so comprehensive, I'm going to write a story about it, and you realize, no, actually this could be a simple chart. Or you think this is going to be a simple chart, and you're able to pull 3-4 charts that need you to add context to them, and that's how you build it into a story. So it's not a very straightforward approach, because at the end of the day, you are trying to tell something that is unique, that's not covered by other people. And that is interesting, and that's very important for your analysis and for your charts. So we just sort of play around with ideas until we decide which direction to take. Okay, I see there's another question from Andrew. How long does a typical story take to develop, days or weeks? And how do you get feedback about it, about if people will be interested? Do you have many follow-up charts like the example you gave? So I'll answer the first question. How long does a typical story take to develop? It could be as little as 2 weeks, if it's a straightforward data set that you can verify very quickly, that doesn't require much scraping, and is usable, almost as immediately as you find it. But it could take months. We recently did a project with Section 27 about the school, the pit toilet crisis in South African schools, especially those in rural areas. And that took, wow, we started working on that last year, and I think one thing that I must mention is that, such sort of like human interest stories, it's very important to remember that, the data, as much as you can say that 400 schools don't have, proper toilets, it affects real people, and it speaks to sort of the failures of government or the Department of Education to fix this, crisis for the last, I don't know how many years. So it's important to humanize the numbers that you get from those stories and to visualize it properly so that people can actually, stand and say, well, this is not right, and we got a big reaction from that. So that took a long time, but most of the stories on our website, anything between 2 weeks to a month. But I mean, if in the middle of doing it, new data comes to light, for example, if you're writing something about crime statistics and you're developing the story for a week or so, and next week the new crime statistics come up, you may need to take a step back and take an extra week to merge, the old stats and the new stats, so that you're able to, account for the fact that, new statistics were released to keep it, as current as possible. Second question, how do you get feedback about if people will be interested? I mean, we also bounce ideas off each other, and we ask a lot of questions that we feel people might ask. We're very different and unique individuals, and we all look at different topics very differently. So it starts with a simple, pitch meeting where we pitch story ideas, and we try to gauge whether people will be interested in it or not. For example, the grocery basket, we didn't actually imagine that people would take such an interest in it. We knew that we would have a fair amount of interest, but right now it's become sort of like a leading product for us, and sometimes you aren't really able to tell what the impact of something is. But by the time the grocery basket was developed, I think it was just an issue. It was just fate, really, because that's when things were starting to get really hard in South Africa. Cooking oil prices were going up, and when people started to realize we're paying this much for basic items, I think it was a very emotional topic, including load shedding. We don't do breaking news as such, like I mentioned, but it is something that directly affects people, and we have the data over time to visualize that. So we definitely know that if we put out something about load shedding, people are going to react because everybody's angry about it, and I think because we go through load shedding every day, we don't really realize how long we sit without lights, and we give you that information. And, you know, when you start to see the numbers and the visuals and the lines going up and down, it's a very horrible picture. Last question. Do you have many follow-up charts? We update all our interactive tools. So the municipality tracker, you'll know that, you know, for example, Joburg is always electing a new mayor. So we update that as it happens. Crime statistics, whenever they are released by the Minister of Police, we update that. Unemployment tracker, we update that as well, so that you can see the trends over time regarding our unfortunately high unemployment rates and how it affects, you know, different groups of people like youth and women and people from disadvantaged backgrounds, for example. And obviously the load shedding tracker, that's an everyday thing. So we update that, you know, on a daily basis. And then Robert wants to know what has been my most impactful visual and why. The World Cup preview that I did, I think was the most impactful because it didn't just speak to from a South African perspective. We try as much as possible to cover things from the continent, but obviously we need to be able to access data, and it's much harder to get data in other African countries than in South Africa, which is already hard. But that really, you know, highlighted sort of like the disparity with, you know, football in other countries in South Africa. And it got a very huge response from people in Nigeria and Ethiopia. You know, I think that was very impactful. It wasn't just the map. There were other visuals too that showed, for instance, how many spots in Africa, Africa as a continent gets. I think we get 5, Europe gets 13. Those are very emotional talking points because it starts to seem very unfair, you know, why we have less spots when we have almost the same amount of countries as Europe, for example. That was very impactful. And the one that I did on stadiums was also very impactful because, you know, people just couldn't believe how low the attendance was. And this speaks directly to the sustainability of football teams. If you aren't able to make money from selling tickets, you aren't able to be sustainable. And if you know something about football is that, you know, a lot of football clubs, Bidvest is one, you know, it was sold after 99 years in existence. And a new club was formed in its place because it wasn't able to remain sustainable, you know. So those are things that people think about when they see how much they're not supporting a sport they claim to love, and why that sport, you know, has the issues that it has. So the stadiums piece and the World Cup piece, that was very, very impactful. And the newsletter is very impactful as well. It's very short and concise. The Outlier sports newsletter that I produce. And whenever people stumble upon some of the things that I visualize and write about, you know, it's very unbelievable sometimes, the things that are happening in our sports. Sukaina, I hope I pronounced that correctly. If someone wants to develop the skills to visualize data, where should they start? So as I mentioned earlier, the Outlier is the publication of MediaHack, and you can find MediaHack on mediahack.coza. And on the MediaHack website, we have a platform called Inside MediaHack, and that's where we like to teach people about the stuff that we do and the stuff that we learn. So MediaHack, Inside MediaHack is where we write articles. If we make a grand discovery during a specific project, for example, that's where we can actually share the lessons that we have. So that's a very great place to start because we tell stuff from a South African perspective, but there are quite a number of sources. The one that I can bet on is datajournalism.org. Let me just verify that that's yes. So you can go to datajournalism.com, sorry, not .org, and that has a lot of education. A lot of it is free. It's got videos, it's got courses, and, you know, discussion platforms, and that's a very good place to start. And the next question, is there income equality in SA football for the interest sake of people? Well, unfortunately, the Premier Soccer League, which is the administrator of football in South Africa, it is a private company. That's the reason that they give for not putting out information. So unlike, for instance, in Europe, where you can find player salary information on the websites of the organizations that run football, there you can't find that information in South Africa. So if you are unable to find information, for example, I know I'm straying from a question, you can then try to go the route of submitting a PIA request for it, especially if it's in the interest of the public. And that's one way you can get around, I'm not getting information from organizations, especially public institutions that are accountable to you. But unfortunately, we aren't able to tell if players are earning what they should be earning, if there's a difference between players who play for bigger teams and smaller teams. And I mean, the PSL itself does not even have a basic minimum wage. So yeah, that's a area that I'm investigating at the moment, but it's very difficult because there are a lot of loopholes to get around, given that the PSL is a private company and they aren't obliged to share information. I just want to wrap up with my presentation. I am around, so if you'd like to chat, and you're around here, we can chat. But I just want to wrap up. So if you are looking for our content where we post, publish regularly data stories and visualizations. I mentioned our world in charts earlier, where we post our visualizations, but we have other platforms as well. We have 6 data-backed newsletters, which you can find on newsletters.theoutlier.co.za. And the newsletters are the main Outlier newsletter, which looks at issues more broadly with the topics that we cover. We've got Revolution, which looks at climate change and the environment. We have the Outlier local government newsletter, which is a very different take on political reporting, and it looks at issues that affect municipalities and metros. And we've got a introduction to data journalism newsletter, which is a 6-part series. You can sign up for that if you'd like to learn how to do data storytelling and visualization. There is a standalone newsletter in that series that focuses on data visualization. We've got Data Bites, which basically answers people's questions about data journalism and visualization. And we've got the Outlier Sports, which I mentioned is curated by me. So you can sign up for whichever newsletter you think interests you, and whichever newsletter you find you may gain more value out of. Our newsletters are published once every 2 weeks, and we don't spam people. So there's a lot of value in the information that we share and visualize. And some new additions that we have, which you'll find on the newsletter.theoutlier.co page, is a Outlier news quiz, which is just a fun way that we try to see if people know things about things, and then we've got Cluedle. If you know Wordle, this is Wordle but for clues. So it's a new edition that you can also check out on that page. And yeah, thank you so much for listening. I don't know if we still have time for questions, but if not, like I said, I am around, and I'll hand back to Stephen. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mamaili, for that amazing presentation. And your team is a small team with, I think, a hugely outsized impact in South Africa, not only in the quality of the work that you do, but also the generosity in sharing your thinking and design and sort of service to South Africa. So if you are on UCT campus and you would like to meet Mamaili tomorrow, then please feel free to come down to the D School building on Middle Campus, and the workshop is taking place on the Studio 4 on the first level, and Mamaili's presentations just before 2 tomorrow. So we are at 4 o'clock, so I think we should wrap up, but please do feel free to pop in tomorrow if you'd like to, or Mamaili's details are online, and she's shared a lot of references in the slides, and they will also be up on the CILT YouTube channel in due course. So thank you so much. Thank you for everybody for joining us, and the great presentation.